Welcome to today's presentation. Today we're going to be hearing from 3 different institutions on how they've set up their research security office. And yeah, I'll get going with this stuff. There's a poll up if you're able to see that, and we'll talk through the results in a minute or two. Here's the slide we've seen in varieties of ways, but who is RCOP? RCOP is essentially the Regulated Research Community of Practice. This is one of our monthly webinars that we host. They're all recorded. You'll see them online later, but sign in, please. It's at the regulatedresearch.org/QA. And we have lots and lots and lots of tools that we've built. We also have an extremely active Slack community, which has been a godsend for finding out what's going on around you. But that was just a quick overview. Essentially, we're just institutions working together to support research subject to regulations. But I made this really cool slide recently with some data cleaning, and I just wanted to show this next one where we were kind of posed with what other places are we meeting at, or do we have contingency at? And after doing a lot of data crunching and looking up memberships that are publicly available, I was able to find out that 64% of us are some form of Carnegie classification of R1, R2, or research college and university. But we also have a lot of overlap with different communities. So for example, we have 93% of the CASC groups and members all also as RCOP members. And I think this is really important just to sort of mention that, like, it's not just an isolated group here talking about supporting these regulations or how are we out in the space. This is really what all of these groups are talking about in their various spaces. So I feel like this is going to push toward, I don't know, a different level of engagement with these types of groups. So I wanted to share it. It's pretty awesome. I also have a ton of ideas for things that are currently happening. Some are bigger than others, but I wanted to offer the buffet of options, and you'll also see it on the sign-in sheet. So if you don't feel like hunting any of these people down, just click the thing on the sign-in sheet and I'll get you connected. But so one of the things is I want to pull together, I think we finally reached a level of maturity for it, but pretty much what are our top challenges and that's impact. And that was requested to me from the ASU Federal Relations team. And they're kind of looking at it from let's start talking about what we need to at the federal level versus just helping each other out internally. So I'm excited to pull that together, but I need some help in terms of what are you seeing or maybe crafting some of that. Jay has been curious on a conversation around when your code starts as public and it's in a repository and then it turns into CUI. How are we handling that? I'm also currently collecting stories and some of the better practices that are going around with the your SSP and what turns it into a living document. So we're going to do a workshop coming up, but I'm trying to collect some of those better stories out there right now. We're looking to refresh the community perspectives on regulated research guide, and we want to turn that into an implementation guide. The other ones we have Ask the Assessor, always looking for a couple more people. The risk group is starting up an 800-171 toolkit updating process. And finally, the only one that's really not on the sign-in sheet is EDUCAUSE is looking for volunteers for the program committee. And I mentioned talk to Wendy on that one, but there's a deadline on that. And so get your voice heard in that space. The other one I wanted to give a big shout out to was the results of the quick poll are out, and it's a really interesting read. So this came out last week, but go check it out. They did a really good job in terms of asking a lot of us what's going on with your 800-171 at your institution. Upcoming, you'll be seeing me if you're attending. I'm going to the HPC security workshop in Maryland. And then a lot of us will be going to the CPPC, yes, in May, and we'll do the full day workshop. Next month, we also are hosting Laura and what's in or out on compliance check-in. So there's been a lot of changes recently. What's going on? So finally, last shout out for this one is essentially we have the full day workshop. I still have some funds to send some people if you're game for doing some of this the jobs that we have posted there. But essentially, it'll be a really great day, and a lot of the community should be there. And with that, I'm turning this over to Erin to introduce our panelists. Oh,
Okay, sorry, I had to move a couple things around.
how about I share the poll too?
Oh yeah, sure.
Um, so in terms of the NSPM 33, we have 62% of us who look like we've begun the implementation. Our biggest one for the how would you rate the coordination was functional, but areas for improvement. And we didn't really have a strong one on has your university seen the DFARS clause yet? So we were kind of about 1/3 everywhere. Sure.
Yeah, interesting. Can you all see the slides that I'm sharing? Yes? Excellent.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So just a quick story on how this webinar came together and how this panel came together. A couple months back, Carolyn had brought together a webinar planning team, and I think it was in our very first meeting during our initial round of introductions. April mentioned that she was, starting in a new role supporting research security, and Carolyn said, I want to know more about that. And so just, before we had even had a chance to meet and dig into the ideal log that, Carolyn had compiled, she had, wrangled April and I to organize a panel. And so I think that's very efficient. Carolyn, thanks for being quick on the draw and getting this panel, together here and started. Today we're bringing you a panel regarding the formation and growth of research security offices, which are sort of a new function on many campuses, and in many cases are bridging functions with other offices. And I'm excited to introduce just briefly our panelists. We have John Jenkins, Director of Research Security at Princeton University, Adam Grant, Director of Research Security at the University of Maryland, and Shelby Still, Assistant Director for Export Control at Emory University. I'm excited to dig in, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it. So just to kind of set the playing field here, as Carolyn noted, our goal today is really to highlight some of the challenges related to implementation of research security programs and point out how different institutions may take their own unique path to address those challenges. So, most of the folks on this call today are associated with IT or data security at your institutions. We'll highlight some of the other groups that play an integral part in ensuring that a strong functional research security program is implemented, and possibly even point out where you in your role at your institution might be able to engage with those other parties. So, we're going to provide you with some examples and then leave it to you to figure out how to actually apply it to your institution. So this is not a template for how to set up a program. So why can't we give you a template for a research security program for you to actually implement? That's really because research security programs have to be risk-based, and each institution's risk tolerance is going to vary based on the size of the institution, the research portfolio, institutional policies, and so forth. What I can say with a certain level of certainty is that research security programs will have to involve lots of different parties across an institution, particularly if your institution's as decentralized as we are here at Princeton. So, for example, how would I describe Princeton's risk profile? Well, we're an R1 institution. We conduct mostly fundamental research, which means research with no publication or foreign national restrictions or national security controls. We're a private institution, and we don't do classified research, but we do manage a DOE lab. So all those factors kind of get mixed up and lead to a particular implementation of research security here at Princeton. And I'll describe what that actually looks like a little bit later in the presentation. But thought first, it might be a good idea to kind of set the playing field here. For those that are not intimately involved in research security discussions, maybe we could start with an overview of what research security actually is. So next slide, Aaron. So simply put, research security is intended to protect academic research activities from foreign interference. The U.S. government likes to state that the intention is to protect the national and economic security of the U.S. I would actually argue that in most cases, the types of research that they're applying these controls to are a long way from ever being economically viable or resulting in products that would impact our national security. So for that reason, I think for most of it, it's more appropriate to think of research security as protection of taxpayer-funded research. So obviously, we have to be good stewards of those research funds that we receive, and we have to ensure that that money is spent uh, for the benefit of the U.S. population. Another tenet that the government has embraced under the research security manual is non-discrimination. That was missing from the initial iterations or initial versions of research security, and I'm glad to see that they have incorporated it into their policies and guidance. What that means is that whatever policies and procedures we put in place have to be applied fairly across the board. I've personally counseled researchers who feel that their contributions to research activities at Princeton are no longer appreciated and that they're being targeted simply because of their national origin. And those are very, very difficult conversations to have with people who we know have contributed so much to our research enterprise. Because of that, it's important that I think each of our institutions implement these policies and procedures fairly and transparently so that people understand what our goal is and how we are conducting our analysis. So with that bit of background, I'm going to turn it over to Adam to illustrate how we actually got to this point.
Thanks, John. I really like what you said about, one, protecting the taxpayer investment in research and, transparency in how you roll out your program, and of course, treating everyone equally. And I think, we're all dealing with the challenge now of, um, specific countries that are really the target of the government's research security concerns. And so that does make it a very, feel like we're walking a tightrope every day, trying to, meet all of the different objectives that we have. But I wanted to just go over this slide briefly because, some of you who are not in the research security profession, or at least not directly involved in that, may not have heard the term NSPM 33. I just did a search of my inbox for that term, and I think I have about 30,000 emails that contain that in it. So I think probably a lot of you are in that same boat where you hear that term all the time. But a few things I'll point out. What is it? It's the National Security Presidential Memorandum 33, and that actually a fact I just learned recently is that NSPM was a term for Trump-specific policies, and each president, I guess, has their own way of defining those. But this came out under the first Trump administration, sort of towards the end of the administration, and basically it was a directive to the funding agencies to get their act together and come up with policies to address these threats. And then and the Biden actually kind of doubled down on this by releasing some more specific guidance for the funding agencies, which included factors such as cybersecurity, but not limited to that. And then that continued to evolve into a standard that the NSF is kind of coordinating. And I think as many of you who are following it, they still haven't dialed in the standard as it pertains to cybersecurity, but there's still a lot of stuff that we are working with on cybersecurity. I think probably all of you are pretty familiar with that. So I'll talk about the specific elements of our research security program a little later in the presentation.
Thanks, Adam. So I think one thing to note is that March 2023 Office of Science and Technology Policy memo that Adam just referenced really was directed to federal research sponsors and told them that they have to require that recipients of federal funding establish these research security programs. Those standards were finalized in July of 2024, but as Adam just noted, they removed a lot of the granularity that appeared in those initial draft standards. The good news is that the final standards offer us a lot more flexibility in applying these overarching research security requirements to our institutions, even though the cybersecurity standards don't exist yet. But that lack of granularity also makes it a lot more difficult for us to actually determine what the government wants us to address. So here at Princeton, we've kind of been looking back at the draft standards to really get a sense of what the government was thinking and what they believe would make a good research security program. And that's kind of what we are building our program out around. Here I've provided some of the requirements for research security programs. I'm not going to go through all of them, but in short, research security programs have to be made publicly available. There has to be a designated point of contact, and we have to have regular self-assessments. They also need to be managed as an integrated program. And I think what they mean by that is in the initial years of concerns that the government was contacting universities about, the universities were responding saying, well, that data is not available to us. It's siloed, it's with a different office, we don't have access to it. And I think what the government is meaning there is siloing of data across various or in various offices across campus is no longer an excuse. They assume that if one office knows something, that the rest of the university should be able to manage that information in order to mitigate those research security risks. So these requirements appear to be relatively simple to accomplish once you have the overall structure of your program in mind. What's actually difficult, though, is actually operationalizing it, in part because our offices have not historically communicated. We definitely have distinct roles and responsibilities at our institutions, and that has made it a bit more challenging. So next slide. So research security is obviously a complicated topic. I've already noted it can span a lot of different functions at an institution. I've highlighted here a couple of the main functions of research security programs. I'd want to point out a couple of them just because these are eating up a lot of my time these days. Evaluation of outside engagements by our researchers, in part to make sure that they're not participating in a malign foreign government talent recruitment program. And I'm not going to bore you with the definition of what that is, but it's just programs that foreign governments have set up in an attempt to bring research expertise and information to their countries. We also work very closely with researchers to implement risk mitigation plans when federal funding agencies have concerns about foreign government access to the research program. And so we've developed templates that we can use with various risk mitigation strategies that we can implement when a government federal or funding agency brings up research security concerns. We also work really closely with our conflict of interest team and our travel team to make sure that our policies in those areas are sufficient to protect both the university and the researcher. And of course, no compliance program is going to be complete without training, so we have invested a lot of time and effort in meeting the training requirements for each of those different aspects of the program. And next slide. So I want to touch on cybersecurity in part because many of our institutions are seeing more and more cybersecurity requirements in our contracts. I think it's important to note that these requirements can show up in any number of forms, from Department of Defense contracts, where you might see CMMC or various DFARS clauses, to just basic cybersecurity requirements like the ones in the FAR 52-204-21. And that can actually show up in any type of federal contract. It's not agency specific. And then, periodically we see HIPAA or GDPR in non-federal agreements. So the point here is that there needs to be a partnership between the contracting office, the sponsored research office. They need to know what to look for and be attuned to what obligations these various contractual requirements may apply to the university, so that then they can notify the appropriate parties at the university and make sure that these controls are actually put in place for those research projects. So there are a number of different ways that these clauses, these contractual requirements can show up. And here at Princeton, we've actually been working very closely with our Office of Information Technology on a network upgrade project to make sure that the next iteration of our network allows more flexibility and, frankly, growth, so that we can apply specific controls to different areas of the network, including all the way down at a lab level. And we feel like that flexibility is going to be key to meeting these security controls, while also not adversely impacting the rest of the university network. So we hope that it will reduce the overall burden on the staff, particularly the staff in the lab that have in the past been responsible for managing some of those specific controls. So that's just a really high level overview, but to highlight some of the challenges in cybersecurity, I thought I'd turn it over to Shelby here.
John. So my part today is to discuss kind of one of the larger clauses that we see that can kind of cause problems as far as sponsor research goes. So DFARS 252.204/7012, or just DFARS 7012, has a pretty big impact on research. So the short version of it is that university projects with DoD funding that include this clause require, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, system security plans in place along with appropriate compliance tracking. Where the challenge comes in is that oftentimes DFARS 7012 is sort of overutilized in contracts and inserted in cases where it really doesn't apply. And so what I wanted to talk to you all today about is a few of kind of our mitigation strategies, as well as a few kind of myths and misconceptions that sort of follow DFARS 7012 and kind of how we approach it when we can see that it's applied and it really shouldn't be. So the first thing we try to do is strike the clause and any related language from the agreement itself. That's ideal, right? If DFARS 7012 isn't applicable, it's ideal to have it removed from the agreement entirely. And so your kind of frontline negotiators are going to be trying to have it removed altogether. Oftentimes that can be challenging, especially if you are dealing with a subcontract and you have maybe a newer or smaller sponsor that isn't quite as familiar with the regulation. They aren't quite as familiar with the fact that they can choose to flow it down, and they flow it down based on what they expect you to be handling. And so sometimes they aren't really comfortable removing it entirely, even though they certainly can. And so the next best thing is to insert mitigating language into the body of the agreement itself. And the key here is that that mitigating language needs to be in the agreement itself. And it needs to say something along the lines of, DFARS 7012 is not applicable to this project, right? In my case, Emory University is not going to be generating, storing, or transmitting CUI, and therefore DFARS 7012 is not applicable to the agreement. As long as that's in the body of the agreement itself, we're good to go. There are a couple of kind of myths and misconceptions that often result in resistance when you're trying to do these things. Sometimes sponsors will tell you that, oh, if it's not applicable, you can just ignore it. It's self-deleting. That certainly poses a risk. And my stance is that that's not an acceptable risk for my institution to take. So we do not accept that it is a self-deleting clause. It is not a mandatory flow down. You'll hear that a lot. It's there because it's a mandatory flow down. It is not. They flow it down, or your sponsor should be flowing it down based on the work that you'll actually be doing. So if CUI is actually going to be a part of your work, then they would flow it down. If not, then it's not flowed down. And lastly, there are a couple of directives and instructions that require the sponsor to identify the type or category of CUI within the body of the research agreement. And this is kind of my last point that I make. If I'm really struggling to get this language removed or mitigated, I'll point out that the sponsor is legally required to tell me the type and category of CUI that I'm supposed to be protecting. Otherwise, how am I supposed to know what I'm protecting? And sometimes that's enough to kind of push the argument home and get this clause removed when it really truly does not apply. Next slide, please. So, as I think we're all intimately familiar with, the road to compliance as far as cybersecurity goes is paved with NIST SP 800-171. It's the foundation of multiple federal regulatory requirements. As we've all seen, right? We've even seen it expand to the NIH. And so there are a couple of, I think, key points. First, ensuring that your research teams understand their compliance obligations early. So if you're one of those kind of frontline folks that are going through these contracts and, we're working hard to get DFARS 7012 removed and, it's either it's applicable or we can't get it removed, we've got to get that SSP done, making sure that the project teams are aware of their requirements, they know who to reach out to, and they get that ball rolling as soon as possible. Making sure that your research administrators and your compliance officers communicate those enhanced security requirements to their appropriate IT units as early as possible. And I'll give credit where credit is due. Louis Dayer was definitely instrumental in driving that point home for me and really making sure that that line of communication was open, and making sure that IT was kept in the loop as early as possible. That's really a big key in this. And lastly, making sure that any language that's included that would eliminate the fundamental research exemption, so what gives us kind of be out as academic institutions, where it would otherwise apply is not accepted. So in other words, avoid accepting CUI language where it doesn't apply, wherever we can. So whether that means removing it from the agreement as a whole or mitigating it, getting that language removed when it's not applicable is also going to help kind of downstream, right? Because we don't want our IT professionals having to create SSPs for essentially nothing. There's nothing to protect, right? So those are kind of our strategies and some key points that we keep in mind as we triage these agreements. Next, we're going to talk about kind of how each institution built their program and what it looks like. So I'll go ahead and turn it over.
All right, so thank you for that, Shelby. We thought, again, it would be a good idea to give you a couple of examples of different structures, again, based on the risk profiles of the different institutions. So at Princeton, the research security function sits in the sponsored programs office under the Dean for Research, and there are a couple of reasons for this. One, these are federal requirements flowing to us via sponsored research activities, and because the export control function already sat in the sponsored research office and had many of the contacts and relationships already established, presumably making it easier to implement a comprehensive research security program. That doesn't mean that research security can't be an independent office or report to audit and compliance or legal counsel or somewhere else. It's just based on what Princeton already had in place and the relationships that had already been established. Now, importantly, research security and export controls at Princeton are a combined function. but understand it's not necessarily a one-to-one match. There are plenty of institutions where the export control program is a separate program, separate function aside from research security. Other thing I will note is at Princeton, we had visitor policies and travel registration policies in place for a long period of time. We had lots of other stuff in place as well, but we did see some shortcomings in some of our existing conflict of interest and conflict of commitment spaces. And so we're in the process of tightening those up now. And that's one thing that my office is working very closely with other groups on to make sure that we document those changes. So how do we actually identify those as being problem areas? The next slide will illustrate two functions that we implemented at Princeton. The first is the Research Security Coordination Committee, and that's a committee under the Dean for Research that is charged with figuring out what the heck the government requirements actually are and whether or not our existing processes and procedures meet those requirements. And if they don't, then the RSCC works with the relevant offices to get those put in place. The membership on the RSCC is really wide ranging. There are over 24 members across 15 or so offices on campus, everything from general counsel to the grad school to IT, audit and compliance, finance and treasury, whole slew of different folks, and includes government affairs and international affairs and other offices as well. So the RSCC meets periodically, usually about every 6 weeks or so. And during those meetings, the members provide updates on where they stand in conducting their gap analysis. So, what policies do they have? What policies are they missing? As well as what remediation measures we can implement to address those gaps. The second thing we did at Princeton was creation of what's known as the Foreign Engagement Assessment Team, or FEAT. Don't love the acronym, but that's what somebody came up with. That group is actually involved in the review of outside professional activities, specifically in countries of concern that federally funded researchers disclose during the conflict of interest reporting process. So what the FEAT really is looking for is participation in those malign foreign government talent recruitment programs that I mentioned earlier. There may be situations where the dean of the faculty or the dean for research may also request that the FEAT process be used to evaluate other types of engagements by, for example, non-federally funded researchers. That is generally done if there is concern that maybe the researcher is in violation of other university policies, like use of resources for private engagements, those types of things. Now, importantly, this structure at Princeton is not the only one that makes sense. There are lots of other ways to structure a research security program. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam to talk about the example at the University of Maryland.
All right, thanks, John. Just a quick history for context. So I came to the University of Maryland in 2012 after working for the federal government and defense industry. And my primary title at that time was Export Compliance Officer. So I think, like many in our glamorous research security field, we came to that through the export compliance trajectory. But of course, there are many ways you can get here, and I'll introduce or reintroduce April in a minute in her role of research security now, since she came from the IT side. So I think, like Princeton, our research security office does fall under the vice president for research. And that was the same with our export compliance program. And up until around 2017, 2018 timeframe, I really had never looked at COI disclosures or proposal development activities like current and pending. Let's see what else. Things like I interact a little bit with our tech transfer office, but the realm of research security is so broad. I wanted to kind of talk about our program and the organizations that we work with. We, with April here, you have 50% of our research security team. And that's a very lean number for a research security office, but it's probably too lean to be frank. But we lean heavily on our team across the university to incorporate the research security program. And on the right here, I have different elements, probably not all elements of our research security program, and I'll just explain briefly our interactions with the other units. The administration and oversight and also the export compliance are things that are directly under our office administration. And so by administration, I'm talking about the federal requirements to have a research security program and how we keep track of that and keep our records. And we also directly administer our export compliance program. Foreign engagements and vetting, that's something that we more or less directly manage, but in that sense, I'm talking about either sponsored research activities with foreign collaborators or visiting scholars or foreign students that are getting an appointment to work in a lab. So we work with other units that manage those processes, but we do the vetting process and keep the records associated with that. Government risk mitigation plans, that's what I'm referring to there is the DoD and other agencies have a mandate to incorporate a risk review on fundamental research projects, and they're looking at the key personnel specifically and who they've collaborated with, and identifying risk factors such as co-authoring with individuals from China or acknowledgments on paper that the research was partially funded by a talent program, different things that they look for. And if they deem the risk high enough, they may require a risk mitigation plan, which is something my office manages. Data security. Now, we are not the ones that maintain the actual system. So we have a division of IT that we partner with very closely to do the system work. But you can have a perfect system that checks all the 110 boxes of the 800 and 171. But what good is it if the researchers are not actually using it? So we kind of deal with the human side of that equation and working with our research team to make sure that they understand that they have to use this system to do their research. So that's, again, a big partnership. COI disclosure and management, which I mentioned, we have a COI office, but anytime someone discloses a foreign activity in their disclosures, that's referred to our office for a review, and we spend quite a bit of time on that. And recently, we've expanded our COI process to include even co-authorships and foreign collaborations and things like that. External disclosures, current and pending, what goes into proposals. We have the same issue with silos that John talked about, but trying to pull all the information together, what's in our sponsored research system, what's in our COI system, all of those things may have to go into proposals. So we work with that office to try to get that stuff or make sure the researchers are aware that they have to put all of those things in their proposals. Training and outreach, something we work with other units on. Travel security, and then we also have UARC, a university affiliated research center that's sponsored by the DoD, and they do mostly classified research there, and they have their own FSO. So I'm not directly managing the security there, but we certainly work with them very carefully. And I put a link here and also in the chat to our written research security program overview, so feel free to check that out. Go ahead and move on. I wanted to spend a moment on restricted research, and one thing that's often kind of comorbid with data security requirements is other kinds of restrictions. And I wanted to point out that typically when you do have data security requirements, you may also have things like export controls or other privacy regulations. So those things can require special actions by the research team. It's not just using the right system. It's, can they have foreign citizens in their labs working on projects? Do they have to get their publication approved by the sponsor? So we help put together a plan to incorporate all of those different requirements. But when we talk about restricted research, so as John mentioned, if there's a requirement in a sponsored research project to submit any research for sponsor approval before it can be put into the public domain, we would consider that restricted research, at least up until which point it's been approved, and then it becomes publicly available, and it's no longer subject to any of these restrictions. But anything with restricted research can have, physical security requirements, IT, personnel, citizenship requirements, and of course the publication approval. Next slide. I want to just give a really quick explanation of export control. I know many of you watching are already professionals in this area, so you're not going to learn anything here. But the briefest way I can possibly explain it and ask, is that export control? Virtually everything you could think of in the U.S., every item, whether it's a phone or even things like pencil erasers, are controlled at some level. And depending on what they are, how sensitive they are, they can be controlled at a very high level, meaning only U.S. citizens or U.S. permanent residents can have access to them, or at the very lowest level, things like common commercial things like pencil erasers in this example can be controlled for sending to foreign countries that are under comprehensive sanctions. So it's a spectrum of control depending on how sensitive is it, where is it going, and things that are the most sensitive are the military technologies, and they fall under a control regime called the ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations, and so those are the things that require the tightest controls, not just IT security, but often physical controls if there's prototypes involved, or things like citizenship restrictions and that. So we've tried to identify what technology we're dealing with when we have an export. You can go to the next slide. Because if you have an export and you have a sensitive technology, you may have to get either an export license from the Department of State for ITAR or Department of Commerce for things that are kind of dual use commercial items that have a sensitive application, which would be the majority of high-tech STEM applied research on campus, things that would have a potential military or a commercial application. So just briefly, what is an export? It's taking an item out of the country. Commonly, you think of putting something on a ship or a commercial air carrier. Those are obvious examples of export, but also just putting things in your luggage, like your laptop, and traveling to a foreign location. That can also be considered an export. And then in the university context, the most common type of export that you would think of is called a deemed export, and that the concept there is that not only is the physical item controlled, but all of the technical information that goes into making that item, or how it performs, et cetera. That technical information can be controlled. So sharing it with a foreign national, whether in your lab or overseas, is considered a deemed export, unless the project doesn't have any restrictions. So there's something called the fundamental research exclusion and export laws that say things that are going to be published are outside of the scope of export control, as long as there are no national security restrictions or things like publication restrictions in the sponsored research. So that's something we look at very closely with our sponsored research office. Are there any publication restrictions? And if so, then we have to get involved and take it to the next level. Next slide. And just another thing, you can have fundamental research where the information you're generating is going to be published, but that doesn't mean all of the inputs that you're dealing with are also, open or free to publish. So we also look at if there's CUI involved, that can bring in export controls or data security requirements. Next slide. And speaking of data security, I'll turn it over to my colleague April to talk about this part. And April transitioned to our research security office just a few months ago. So, she's still wrapping her head around the broader scope of research security, but hopefully you're enjoying it, April. Good to have you.
Thank you, Adam. So like Adam mentioned, for most of my time here at UMD, I've been here for a little over 5 years. I spent my time in Division of IT, and I've had the unique experience, still fun, of heading over to the Division of Research. And this slide here is kind of just meant to kind of help guide you guys in terms of the different roles and responsibilities that may be shared amongst the divisions, and whether you need buy-in from leadership or just are trying to outline and scope how you are structured, it could be helpful in just kind of seeing these different bullets here. So I think one thing for us here at UMD that has been really beneficial is having that dedicated IT staff working specifically on research. So within Division of IT, I was on the research computing team, and I was already working with Adam's team on the research security side just because of that collaboration that's required. In my previous role, my title was compliance analyst, so I was heavily involved in our system security plan, implementing those controls, working with our engineers to get the technical controls implemented. And that's essential because on the TCP side, on the research security office, they're attesting to that compliance for those systems. So that collaboration was kind of already built in by having that dedicated team on the IT side. And I think that was really important. Adam mentioned earlier just the concept of researchers actually using the environment. And in my previous role, we actually ended up implementing a quarterly report that kind of outlined system usage, and we would send that to the research security office, and that then allowed them to audit researchers' use of the system and make sure that they're adhering to the TCPs that they're signing. Another thing I want to highlight here is just incident reporting. Like in the Division of IT, obviously there's a monitoring of the security incidents that takes place, but ultimately on the RSO side, we are assigning and attesting to that in the contracts. And so for me, in my previous role, I held that medium assurance certificate that's needed for DoD reporting. And you may just think about it in your organization. Is it held in DIT? Is it held in Division of Research? Maybe it's someone on the SOC. So that question is there just to kind of help you or make you think about where some of these requirements should land in Division of IT versus Division of Research. Again, documentation, I don't think you're going to get away from that on either side. So whether it's the SSP or the TCP, those are some of the shared responsibilities that we have. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Shelby.
April. I know we're kind of running low on time, so I'll just kind of quickly run through how we've kind of set things up at Emory, and I want to make a couple of disclaimers. The first being that I'm still relatively kind of the new guy on campus at Emory. June will be a year for me at Emory. My background is really in CUI and CMMC and more kind of the cybersecurity. And so research information security is really kind of a meism, and I'm using it in this case to distinguish between the real nitty-gritty cybersecurity controls as opposed to the more overarching research security and NSPM 33 regulations. So at Emory, we have two distinct offices. We have an office of export control, which, like we mentioned at the very beginning, is where I am as the assistant director, and we have a separate office for research security. So broad research security falls under the research security office, as you might expect. So things like international travel, international research collaborations, COI, COC, and they also host a ton of resources for our research community on their webpage as well. So including new guidance on the new NIH GDS policy. So that's kind of how it's structured for us, whereas research information security, and again, I want to reiterate, that's kind of a meism. So I'm talking about things like CUI is with the Export Control Office, largely because that's where I am. So we're sort of the point of contact for all matters related to CUI. We help with contract negotiation for CUI as well as export controls, of course. So we're kind of working along our OSP office to, again, try and remove clauses where they don't apply and really try and shrink that net where we can. And we're also a stakeholder in building out a secure enclave for CMMC compliance. So Emory was largely still is largely a fundamental research only institution. And so CMMC is kind of a new challenge for us. And so what we've done is we've taken both offices, so both export controls and research security, have come together with our offices of IT and Office of Sponsored Projects in what we call the CMMC working group. And so we have unique expertise from each office as well as each individual person. And meeting regularly helps us ensure consistent and congruent guidance for our research community. So it makes sure that we're all on the same page so that when folks come to us with questions, we know how to answer them or we know how to direct them. Both of our export control and research security offices collaborate on several items. So things like international visitors, especially, as well as international travel, those are things that we collaborate on. And as a whole, we fall under the umbrella of Research Compliance and Regulatory Affairs, or RCRA. And as a whole, as a unit, we collaborate on a lot of things, but especially things like guidance for emerging policies that kind of include multiple aspects of these things, right? So for example, the new NIH GDS policy. One thing that we do that I think is really cool that I don't see everyone doing is we host a monthly Ask RCRA forum for our research community. That I think is really unique and I really enjoy a lot. And it gives our research community a chance to ask questions ahead of time, ask questions while we're there, attend when there are topics that they're interested in learning more about. And it gives us a chance to convey updated policies or new regulations to our research community. And it gives them kind of an open line to us as a whole. And so we're really kind of newer in building up a CUI CMMC program. And I think what's really neat is that we've kind of manually done it, right? We've just manually made it work. We've taken experts from all of our fields and all of our offices to come together into one working group to make sure that everyone's on the same page and that we're developing a congruent program. I think that's it for us. I think next is questions. I know we have some that we were planning to hit, but I know we've got a lot in the Q&A as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go to is the Q&A. Thank you folks for throwing some questions in there. And it looks like the top two that were kind of voted up have to do with the differences between research security and research cybersecurity. I'll just read this, one question here. Are you making these distinct programs where one is under the Office of Research and the other is under IT or InfoSec? And I think the other related question was kind of where does research cybersecurity sit at your institution, and is it separate from research security? So I don't know if anybody on the panel wants to weigh in there, or anybody in the community wants to elaborate.
I'll take a quick swing, and I think I kind of touched on it, but it's a shared responsibility at UMD. Our division of IT and also our UARC maintain processing enclaves for the NIS 800-171 requirement. Our office does not do the data or system maintenance, but we work with the researchers to make sure that they're going to use the system and that they know they have to. So we're kind of in the middle ground, but it's a close partnership.
Yeah, I'd say the same at Princeton. So our research computing group actually reports to the Dean for Research now. Previously, they were reporting to Office of Information Technology. But that being said, there is a close partnership between the VP of IT and the Dean for Research at Princeton, because they both understand how important research data security is to the research enterprise at Princeton. So they talk quite a bit and are really both focused on making sure that we can meet these cybersecurity obligations.
And similarly for us, our CMMC working group includes our Chief Information Security Officer, as well as several of his staff who actually developed the SSPs. So we talk not only about the regulations and what they look like in agreements, but also making sure that my job is eliminating DFARS 7012 where it doesn't apply to really minimize the work that comes down to our IT staff. So we try to make sure that we share the responsibility of understanding the requirements, as well as we also share the responsibility of scoring the SSPs as well. So we have a pretty collaborative approach to it as well.
Awesome. I think maybe we have time for one more question. So the next most popular here was, do any of your institutions have situations where, for example, a school or department expect that IT will be solving most of the regulatory needs? And is there a need to reiterate the shared responsibility?
I'll jump in. So yeah, I do think that that's a challenge. These are complicated issues, and I think we try to convince people that, look, this is a shared responsibility, both from central IT, departmental staff, the staff in the lab themselves, and of course the research security function. So we really do try to coordinate, communicate, and work together to address these issues. It's not just it's not just an IT issue. It spans a lot of different groups.
Yeah, I'll say I'm sure probably everyone here that works at a big institution have examples of departments that don't want to cooperate with one group or the other group, or they want to do it all themselves. So we certainly deal with that. The way that my office tries to get ahead of those issues is that we worked very closely with our Office of Research Administration, our contracts and grants group. We're kind of the first line when they find a security issue or something in the contract. They come to us, and we have a process where we do not let them turn on that account so that people can get paid until we have everyone's buy-in to comply with whatever requirements there are. So we kind of control the money side of it. I think that's what I found to be the most effective. If we get that sort of attitude, we can say, well, you can have that attitude, but if you want to work with DARPA or work with the Army or whatever it may be, you've got to agree to all of these requirements. So I take that pretty seriously, and I would I've gone so far as to threaten to decertify a research proposal if they're not going to cooperate, because you are putting your name on the line when you sign up to those things. Everyone is.
And we had a similar process in my previous institution where we could put a stop on an award if it had DFARS 7012 and there wasn't an SSP in place yet. And it made a really nice, helpful, bright red stop sign. At Emory, I think because we're kind of building from the ground up, we are really fortunate to have a really collaborative group. We have a separate group for research security and international collaborations that includes a lot of directors, deans, and so we get the chance to chat with them. They actually invited me to chat with them about CUI fairly recently. So we get the chance to talk to them and, again, really make sure that we're collaborative as much as possible and that we're all on the same page. And so I think we're kind of all, as multiple units and multiple people who care about our institution, kind of pushing this big rock of CMMC and CUI up the hill together.
Awesome. I think that's time. Thank you so much to the panelists. Carolyn, anything to close us out?
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
All right, thanks.